Welcome to tonight's lecture, which is on the theme of Britain is an economic dictatorship, time for economic democracy. Now, my starting point is very simple. We expect political democracy, why not economic democracy as well? Imagining a society where the economic system was in closer democratic alignment with the political system seems perfectly reasonable and plausible. Yet it's not on anybody's political agenda. I find that strange. Extending the franchise economically, to me, makes sense. It makes democratic sense. It's a simple matter of justice and fairness, which would help lay the foundations for a more equitable society and a more constructive partnership between capital and labour, between employees and those who hold managerial and shareholder positions. I want to have a chance to imagine what society could be. Too often we just accept society as it is. It's great that parties like Labour are proposing a challenge to austerity. Great that they're defending public services. But I think we need to go one step further. We need to challenge the economic structure of society. We need to question who has economic power and how that power is exercised. And that means questioning and imagining a different way of organising the levers of economic power. It means upscaling economic participation, accountability, transparency, and decentralisation. To get away from the top-heavy pyramid we have at the moment, where a tiny, tiny minority of people, the major shareholders, managers and directors, hold all the economic power, while the mass of people, both in private institutions and in public services like the National Health Service, have no economic power at all. That is not democratic. Now, a form of economic democracy is, in my view, possible. But we have to imagine it. We have to think about it. We have to devise what that might be. And I think that nobody, even the defenders of the current system, can possibly claim that the current economic model is democratic. It is a system of economic dictatorship, characterized by a lack of democracy, a lack of participation, a lack of transparency, and a lack of accountability. Employees are frozen out of economic decision-making. Within the existing system, which too many people take for granted, big business rules. And even the public services are run on big business lines. So local councils, the National Health Service, and other public institutions have the same kind of top-heavy administration, where the people at the top make all the decisions and the ordinary employees have no meaningful say. If we look at private enterprise, we can see that the captains of industry, commerce and finance have almost total power. They run their enterprises on quasi-totalitarian lines. They make all the decisions. They're not accountable to consumers. They're not accountable to employees. They can make decisions affecting millions of people's lives, and yet those people who are affected don't have any meaningful input. So the economic system that we live under is very much concentrated in the hands of a tiny, privileged elite of shareholders, directors and managers. And that is in complete contrast to the one person, one vote principle that characterises our political system. In our economic system, the top brass have all the votes, and the vast majority of people have no votes. They decide on hiring and firing, pricing, investment, technology. They decide everything, and the people at the grassroots get to decide nothing. They are subject to a totalitarian system of economic dictatorship. Let's just look at the statistics for wealth and power in our society. Back in 2010, the richest 1,000 individuals in Britain had a combined personal wealth of £335 billion. Last year, it had increased to £575 billion. This year, it's gone up to £658 billion. The 1,000 richest people in Britain have a combined personal wealth of £658 billion. The poorest 50% in Britain have less than 10% of the national wealth. Of all the land in Britain that's in private ownership, 1% owns 70%. You can get my drift. There are huge economic disparities. And the economic system we have sustains those inequalities. It's a structural system that perpetuates great wealth for a handful at the expense of the vast majority. So, there are deep, deep flaws in our economic system. What might be the alternative? Well, I certainly don't have all the answers. I haven't got a perfect blueprint. But I'd like to suggest tonight some fragments of what an alternative economic democracy might look like. And I'm sure greater minds than mine will come up with even better ideas. But let's have the conversation. Let's imagine what could be rather than simply accept what is. So I've got 4 ideas. 4 very simple, easy ideas. The first is we need to have a check and balance on the abuse of economic power. And one way to do this would be to make corporate negligence and recklessness an explicit criminal offence. So you're familiar, I think, with what happened with the Royal Bank of Scotland and Northern Rock in 2007 and 2008. The managers, the directors, the major shareholders made reckless, irresponsible economic investment decisions, which resulted in those banks failing and it almost brought down the entire British economy. I think the directors and managers responsible for those choices should have been held personally liable. Because if they had been, if they knew that they could personally answer for their actions by bearing the personal cost of the financial losses and facing the prospect of prison, I bet they would have not taken those foolish, reckless investment decisions. I think that if criminal actions, if corporate recklessness and negligence was a criminal offence, it would help ensure more responsible economic management and act as a deterrent to those who would gamble with the economy for personal gain. I don't believe that bankers and big company bosses should be able to wreck our economy and then get away with it. I don't think they should be able to take decisions for which they have no accountability and no comeback. I don't think they should be allowed to squander people's jobs, pensions and savings with impunity, which is what the Northern Rock and RBS directors did. As I said, I think they should be held personally liable for damaging corporate decisions in the same way that doctors, solicitors and other professionals can be held liable for negligence. I think you can be pretty sure that the threat of legal penalties, including personal financial payback and prison, would result in more prudent corporate governance. Another proposal I suggest is that all medium and large sized companies and public institutions like the National Health Service should be required by law to have on their management boards 1/3 employee elected directors and independent directors appointed to represent the interest of consumers. I think we need to have a counterbalance to corporate power at the board level. Now, this is not such a radical idea. In Germany, they have a works council system where there's a partnership between capital and labour. It's not as radical as what I would like to see, but it does result in greater workplace fairness, and it also results in better industrial relations. On the whole, Germany has fewer strikes, it's a more productive economy, and part of the reason is because there's a better partnership between the managers and directors, the shareholders, and the employees. So if it works in Germany, why can't a similar system work here? We know that where employees feel they have a real stake in their enterprise, whether it be, BP, or it be the local council, where they have a stake, they will be more happy, content, satisfied, and productive employees. So, industrial democracy, workplace democracy, is not only an issue of fairness, it's also an issue of goodness for the economy. And of course, not being so driven by the profit motive, employee and consumer directors could push for workplace policies and decisions that are more socially inclusive and responsible. Safeguarding equal opportunities, environmental rights, ensuring that we end the disparity between London and the South East and the rest of the country. They could also act as watchdogs or whistleblowers against corporate irresponsibility to help prevent the implementation of harmful boardroom decisions. As I said, if we'd had directors from the workforce and from consumer organisations on the boards of RBS and Northern Rock, you can bet they would have blown the whistle about those bad investment decisions, which would have saved those banks and saved the economy of this country from the devastation it experienced post-2008. Another idea is to break up the unhealthy concentration and centralisation of economic power. And one way to do this would be to establish employee mutual societies, to give their members control of their own pension funds. At the moment, pension funds are hived off to private corporations who invest pensions based upon their own corporate agenda. I think there's a very strong case for saying that the pensions belong to the members. The members should have direct or ultimate control over those investment decisions. Now, currently, employee pension funds amount to around about £1,000 billion. That's about 1/3 of the entire stock market. So if control of these pension funds was given to employee mutual societies, that would act as a countervailing force against the interests of purely private capital. It would give ordinary people an input, a stake in investment decisions, and they could use that power to make investment decisions that better suited their members. Now, of course, pensions, employees are going to want to get the best possible return. But not if it means hiving off money to China or India, when there's a need for investment at home in the local community, which would benefit everybody directly. So, for example, in the northeast, there are parts of the northeast which are very run down, massive underinvestment. If there are employee mutual societies in the northeast, they could choose to invest their pension money in the local community to revitalise their own communities, which in the long term would be beneficial not only for the pension contributors, but their families, friends and whole communities. I think it's really, really important that we get away from the idea that big money knows best, that corporate interests have all the answers, that they alone have the wisdom and the ability to make good investment and pensions. Of course, employee mutual societies should get expert financial advice, but they should have the ultimate power to decide. So, an employee-controlled pension fund might be incentivised to operate in ways that help make the economy more people-centred, more public welfare-oriented, more mindful of environmental consequences, more supportive of marginalised communities. Hopefully, they might invest less in the arms trade and clothing and sweatshops, and they might be more open to investing in decisions that meet the social needs of their members. In new renewable energy, new medical technologies, affordable housing, investment in new local jobs in run-down, deprived communities. And this can only happen if the employees themselves have a meaningful, direct say in how their pension funds are invested. The final example I'd give is another example of how we could devolve and democratise economic power. The idea is to create a scheme of employee share ownership or employee share funds, which would be collectively held and administered on behalf of all staff in an enterprise. Again, it would be through a system of employee mutual societies. Now, under this idea, private share capital companies would be obliged by law to assign these employee mutual societies a proportion of their annual profits in the form of a new share issue, or in terms of a cash payment. The idea is that if a company performs well, if it increases its profits, and in particular if it increases its productivity, then ordinary employees should share in that. It shouldn't all go into the pockets of the major shareholders, managers and directors. It shouldn't all be swallowed up by gigantic bonus payments for people at the top. The employees have a right to share in increased profits and productivity. Now, the great strength of this scheme is not only its democratic and social justice elements, but it also incentivises and rewards employees for economic success. So the more productive and profitable a company is, the more shares it will be required to issue to its members. And they will, over time, gradually through their share ownership issue, gain greater power and influence in the boardroom. They'll be able to use their leverage as share owners to influence the board. So it's another way in which the voices of ordinary employees can be heard in the boardroom and can influence decisions there. And of course it will also greatly encourage employees to resolve issues with management rather than just simply going on strike. Of course they have a right to go on strike if that's the ultimate necessary action, but if employees have direct representation on the boards of companies, if they've got share ownership, which gives them influence on the board of the company. They will be able to take their case directly to the management. They'll be able to resolve the issues. And because they have a stake, they will be, I believe, more productive employees. They'll improve their productivity, which will benefit them because they will gain from it. It'll benefit their firms, and it will benefit the whole economy. It's a win-win for everyone. Now, as well as redistributing economic power in favour of employees and the wider public, these four elements of a new economic governance would reduce the likelihood of a rerun of the economic crisis we've been going through since 2008. It wouldn't guarantee that there'll never be a repeat, but it would very significantly reduce that likelihood. And as I'm sure you're all aware, our economy even today is still very fragile. There is a serious risk of another 2008 type crisis. There's a serious risk of a major economic meltdown, not just in Britain, but globally. We need to act preemptively to ensure that doesn't happen. And these four measures can be part of the answer. Perhaps not the whole answer, but part of the answer as to how we can avoid that. And they all have a number of key common elements. They decentralise economic power, they democratise economic decision making, they improve corporate social responsibility, and they strengthen the accountability of businesses to their employees and to consumers. This transcendence of elitist, concentrated, and autocratic economic power would, I believe, result in a future society with a more democratic, cooperative, and accountable economy, and a more prosperous and productive economy to boot. So my question is, why can't we imagine it? Why can't we make it happen? I go back to my starting point. If we insist upon political democracy, why not economic democracy too? Thank you. any of you are interested, as I mentioned, I run a small human rights foundation. Some leaflets here about it. On the back it tells you how to sign up to receive our email bulletins. Totally free, no charge. So take one if you're interested. You sign up on the back. And we do a lot of really below the radar stuff about human rights campaigns around the world. Like, who knows about the persecution of the Kalash in Pakistan? Only 4,000 Kalash people are left because they've been terrorized by the Sunni Muslims and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Only 4,000 of this tribe are surviving. We publicized that a few weeks ago. We did a big report about women's rights in Pakistan, talking about some of the extreme violence and discrimination against women in Pakistan. So if you're interested in these kinds of things, where I work on democracy in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, supporting liberation struggles against Indonesia's occupation of West Papua, or Pakistan's occupation of Balochistan, please take one. You'll find it really interesting. But thank you so much, and good luck with your studies.